Hey everybody, my name is Julia. Welcome to the Walt Disney Archive stage. Are you guys excited? Thank you all for joining us for the Marvel Comics 50 Years of Wolverine panel. Without further ado, distinguished guests, please welcome Marvel Comics Editor-in-Chief, C.B. Cebulski.
How are we doing today, D23? All right, wow, full house today. We are going to talk about Marvel's 85th anniversary a little bit later, but as part of that, we're also going to be here to mainly talk about Wolverine, correct. So as they said, my name is C.B. Cebulski. I have the honor of serving as editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics. That's me drawn as in manga form by the artist of Spider-Man Kazuna in Japan, Hachi Mizuno sensei. I always like doing that. I think he captured me quite well as the other characters. Wolverine down there at the bottom. One of my biggest pet peeves that I always tell artists on covers is don't crop the claws. Mizuno sensei didn't get the message, unfortunately, but it's a beautiful piece. Now, like I said, today we will be celebrating Wolverine's 50th anniversary. Who thinks they know everything there is to know about Wolverine? Anyone in the audience? All right, a couple people. I'm going to challenge you because we have some questions, we have some stuff that I'd never even heard of about Wolverine's origin before that we're going to be running you through. The mystery is going to be revealed. We're going to pull back the curtain and tell you all about everything you love about the three-clawed mutant that we all read in the comics week in, week out. Now, I'm not going to be doing this alone. I would like to welcome one of the writers of not only the Wolverine comic book, but one of the men who's probably written more of Wolverine in all the other comics he's written for Marvel. It's one of his favorite characters, not his favorite character. Please give a big round of applause for writer Jason Aaron.
Wow. Hello. Thank you.
So Jason, you have quite a history with Wolverine.
I do. Kind of a unique history with Wolverine, I think, right?
Now, you've written him in many different eras, many different comics, many different costumes.
Right.
Now, here are two fantastic pieces of artwork that we put up just to give people the idea of how long Wolverine's been around and all, maybe not even all, some of the costumes that he's worn over the years. On the left there is a piece by Russell Dauterman of Wolverine Through the Ages, and on the right is a piece by Ron Lim called The Many Lives of Wolverine. Now, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but just to give fans a preview, do you have a favorite era or favorite costume from Wolverine's history?
Oh, I absolutely have a favorite costume, which is on there, right? It is on there. Yeah, I see it. Do we want to talk about that now, or are we going to get to that later?
Let's talk about that a little bit later.
Okay.
Sorry, just putting down my cheat sheet here. Also, I know everybody's here because they love Wolverine, but a lot of people do come because they know in the past we've given out a comic when you leave, a special D23 Marvel comic. I'm assuming people are here for that as well? Yeah. Well, as a special surprise, this year we have not one, but two comics that you'll be getting. Not only is it Wolverine's 50th anniversary, it is Donald Duck's 90th anniversary. So here we have two covers, one of Donald gifting Logan a cake and one of Logan gifting Donald a cake, drawn by the amazing Humberto Ramos. Humberto, are you here somewhere? Humberto Ramos, right over here, ladies and gentlemen. Humberto and Jason will be doing a signing at 4:30 in Talent Central later today. If you want to join, get the comics when you leave, and then please feel free to come on down and see us. All right, so first off, who knows what issue was Wolverine's first appearance? All right, so yeah, people always debate Hulk 180 or Hulk 181. It's 180, correct. All right, see, you got the first question right. So, yeah, Wolverine debuted in one panel of Hulk 180, so that is technically his first appearance. But Hulk 181 was where he had his first full adventure, and was introduced to the world.
Cover appearance.
First appearance, known as the Wolverine. So, Jason, I'm sure you've gone back and read this comic. Do you know a lot about the origin of Wolverine?
I don't. I've heard different stories. I do own this comic. I do have a Hulk 181 in my collection. Yeah.
I actually had a copy of this as well, but when I was a senior in high school, I traded it at my local comic shop for a full run of a different comic series. But we were talking about this a little bit before the panel. Is that many characters come out fully formed from the creator's mind. Like, Spider-Man, Stan Lee, and Steve Ditko really had that down. The powers, the origin story, the family, a lot of that. And Daredevil, kind of the same way. But Wolverine's a character that's been kind of put together over the years and over a number of decades even before we got to the full story of Wolverine.
Sure, yeah, there's a lot of characters like that. Like Thor is like that. So much of what we think of with that character has been added over the years by different creators. And yeah, this version of Wolverine, it doesn't have all the trappings that we associate so much with that character today. It's just like the core of it, the beginning of it, right?
Yep. And you might not know this because it's so ingrained in people's, knowledge now that he has adamantium claws. He's a mutant. They pop from the back of his hands. That wasn't the case at first. When he was originally thought of, by Len and Herb, they had they were claws on gloves. So that's something that people might not know. That's something that actually surprised me, when I first heard about that, because we know him and love him as Wolverine. He's, the mutant that we know. But here, when he was originally designed, it was supposed to be gloves with claws on them. Now, he was introduced here in 180 and 181, but we really didn't see Wolverine again until a little bit later. Giant Size X-Men 94. Fans of that comic here. I'm assuming everybody knows where it came from, all right? Do you own this one?
I don't, no, sorry. I don't.
So Wolverine debuted in the Hulk, and then later he moved over into X-Men, Giant Size X-Men, or X-Men 94 when it was coming out. And that's where no one really knew a lot about his origin. He was this merry mutant that or not even a mutant. He was a character that we'd seen before that joined the X-Men as part of the new team of X-Men. And he'd go on to appear in many different ways, in many different forms, and have many different adventures with the X-Men. But people really did not know much about Wolverine.
We knew he was Canadian, right? Like, wasn't it? That X-Men team was very international. You had Storm, you had Colossus, and Wolverine was like the surly Canadian, the surliest of all Canadians, I think, officially.
Yeah, exactly. And I think actually issue 108 right here was with Guardian from Alpha Flight in Canada.
Canadian violence there, yes.
Yep. So here's your first, another fun fact about Wolverine you might not have known. I don't even if you know this. Jim Shooter was the editor-in-chief back in the day, and he had a mandate that when Wolverine was in his non-costumed form, you could draw him with arm hair. But when you put him into costume, he was not allowed to have arm hair. True story.
Wow.
And it was something that irked John Byrne for ages when he was drawing it. And you could go back and look. But there came a point where one artist said, I'm not doing that. That's dumb. He's got hair on his arms when he's Logan. He's got hair on his arms when he's Wolverine, and changed it. And then from that point on, everyone just started drawing him with arm hair. But now,
can I just point out one of my favorite things is, when we first saw Wolverine, he's wearing the very trademark mask, right? Then once he took the mask off, you see his hair is exactly the same. It's like, who are you fooling with the mask? Like, clearly we know it's you, bro.
And so Wolverine joined the X-Men, and it wasn't until 4 or 5 months later that he actually took the mask off.
Oh, sorry, did I jump ahead?
No, you didn't jump ahead. That's fine. So does anyone know what issue this is by chance by just the panels we're showing here? No. 98, correct. All right, we're going over to this side. All the knowledge over here. So this was X-Men 98. A beautiful issue. They're all hanging out here in Rockefeller Center, actually right where the Marvel offices just happen to be now. Please drop by. But this issue had two firsts, actually. It had not only the first time we saw Logan, and I say that because he hadn't been named Logan yet. First time we saw Wolverine as a part of the team without his mask on. And Marvel no longer condones smoking, so everyone knows that. It was also the first issue in which he popped his claws. So 98 is another key issue for Wolverine fans and another key piece of his history. Now, who knows this issue? Anyone? This is an even harder one than the last one. Okay, this is X-Men 103. Now, you'd think this is much later. Remember, Hulk 180, 181, X-Men 94. So, here we're talking about almost a year later. This is where they finally name him or call him Logan. But it's not a team member. It's not another Professor X. It's a leprechaun who knows his secret identity and calls him Mr. Logan. So for for a number of issues until later, we'll get to it, people didn't know if Logan was his first name or his last name. He was just Mr. Logan. So again, did you know that?
I not until you told me about this bit the other day. No, I did not. I forgot about the big important X-Men Leprechaun issue.
So Jason, let me ask you, and just as someone who's written Wolverine, of course, in your mind, what are the top 3 or 4 characteristics that define Wolverine?
That's a good question. I think it's, just simple. We think of the claws, we think of the look. I think he's, the guy who's like a Ronin. He's sort of the masterless samurai who is violent, who pops his claws and does a lot of stabbing, but lives by a very moral code that guides him. And I think also that he's just haunted and troubled, for so long. He didn't remember his past, and he's lived a long time and been through so much over the years. And so I think the combination of all that, and initially in these days is also that he was short, right? Yeah. Like that he was the scruffy little guy, which I think was a big part of it, which we've kind of gotten away from somewhat, but
which Deadpool and Wolverine movie addressed head on.
It did, yes, it absolutely did.
So this was Uncanny X-Men 103, and it wasn't till about 13 issues later, that we first learned that Wolverine had a healing factor. Again, this is going along. This shows you how long and how many issues between these different revelations about Wolverine and Logan's life that we went through to make him the character that we know and love today, like Jason just described some of his attributes. It was in Uncanny X-Men 116 by John Byrne, Chris Claremont and John Byrne here, where he talks about it's hard to break his bones. So this was the first time that we talked about that he could heal fast. And again, we didn't know about adamantium. We didn't know about the healing factor. He wasn't identified even as a mutant just yet. So this is where we learned he could heal fast. And then it was in 2 years later, in issue 142, when they finally used the word healing factor and identified that as one of his mutant powers. Again, years between these revelations in Wolverine's history. So, another trivia question. This is not an X-Men question, actually. It's a Marvel Universe question that is related to a factor in Wolverine's life. Who knows what comic adamantium was first introduced in? Avengers, correct. Issue number? 66. You got to come up here later. I got to give you a
Tom Brevoort back there.
You're winning. You're winning left and right today. Yeah. So it was in Avengers 66 that adamantium was first introduced into the Marvel universe, into the Marvel mythos, and when they were writing when Claremont was writing and was going into Wolverine's history and established his healing factor, established that he had unbreakable bones, they tied the adamantium back into his origin from an old issue of Avengers. So, and that's kind of almost the end of the story where Wolverine came together. what we have here was, we saw this, was where a scene where Proteus goes to take over Wolverine, but the thing is Proteus is allergic to metal. So this was where we figured out that Wolverine first had the metal adamantium skeleton. So this is kind of where Ward...
So not just the claws,
no,
but the whole
body. So we're kind of it all came together, and where the revelation started happening about Wolverine. Now, Jason, as you know, there are many loves in Wolverine's lives. We even did a series about it called "The Lives of Wolverine" and "The Loves of Wolverine." But who would you say was one of his original? Who was he smitten with originally? Who was one of the Marvel characters, one of the X-Men that you think Wolverine fell for first?
Well, I mean, I think that Jean Grey is the classic one, right? Like that, it's a long running love triangle between Jean and Wolverine and Scott Summers' Cyclops.
Sure. And here you'll see this was the first time that we saw Wolverine kind of openly admit the fact that he had something, burning love for Jean. This was Uncanny X-Men 101, where we see him bring flowers with the intention of giving them to Jean, but the door opens and all the X-Men are there, and Wolverine says, Logan says, I'm really not in the mood to do it in front of everybody. And then you mentioned the love triangle. It was actually in X-Men 110, a little bit later, that we see Wolverine again in his thought bubbles. We don't use them as much anymore.
Oh, I still love thought bubbles, yeah.
So we have the thought bubbles, and we learn not only of Wolverine is continuing to pine for Jean Grey, but also it's the first time where he kind of goes up and admits that he's jealous of Scott. There's going to be a love triangle. This is the start of the love triangle that continues to this day, actually, through the Krakoa, even in X-Men 97, which I'm sure everyone here has seen, of course.
Can we just pause to appreciate those sideburns that he's got going on there? Like, those are some truly impressive sideburns. Maybe that's part of his mutant power somehow, the ability to grow awesome sideburns.
Yeah, exactly. Part of it, maybe. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, actually, too. Now, these are some classic... Wolverine's one of the characters who's had the most covers probably homaged. Him and Spider-Man. That so many artists love classic poses from the different interior pages and from the covers, that we see homages of these all the time. So much so that when we were building this deck, I said, oh my God, we have the new book that just started, NYX, that started coming out as part of the new X-Men line, From the Ashes. And I remember I said, didn't we do an homage of that panel? And sure enough, there is a lovely homage to that panel that's been done over and over and over. And it's even been parodied. These was a series of covers that we did called Deadpool punks Wolverine in honor of the movie. And again, here you can see that image has not only been taken from the comic and done into variant covers, but done into variant covers that are poking fun of other variant covers. So Wolverine has a different life of his own when it comes to the cover images.
And this moment was like such a huge moment in Wolverine's history, from the Byrne Claremont Uncanny X-Men book, where it was kind of the first time you saw Wolverine unleashed, right? Where he took on the Hellfire Club by himself, and him, what you've seen a million times since then of Wolverine popping his claws and tearing through a bunch of bad guys. This is kind of the first time you got that in a huge, savage way.
Now, do you have a favorite Wolverine memory, or your first comic, or there's an issue that you always go back to where you think, wow, that was really where I fell in love with the character?
Yes. Yeah, for me it was absolutely the Mutant Massacre storyline of Uncanny X-Men, in particular this is it 211, issue 211, right? Yep. Which they were doing these Marvel 25th anniversary covers at the time, that's wild to think it was so long ago. It was the 25th anniversary, but no. This was a comic I literally bought off the spinner rack at the drugstore and caught my eye first time I started reading X-Men. And again, it's a similar sort of moment. I mean, the whole Mutant Massacre story was really good and kind of put the X-Men through some dark, trying times. And again, you got to see Wolverine kind of unleashed in a really cool way. And for me as a kid, like, that blew me away.
Now, when it comes to Wolverine or any Marvel hero, they're really also defined by their villains. And obviously, the X-Men have a lot of villains, but there's the classic pairings across the Marvel universe. There's Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, Fantastic Four and Doctor Doom, and the list goes on and on for there. So, going to ask the audience, who do you think are some of Wolverine's more classic villains? Silver Samurai, Lady Deathstrike, Sabretooth. Oh, there was a big Sabretooth outpouring right there, and that's where we're going to get into the next slide, is Sabretooth. This is years later where you never realize that it's become such a well-known rivalry and they're such classic villains. It wasn't really established until later in Wolverine's history that the two of them developed their beef, and it was in these two issues particularly where we saw Wolverine and Sabretooth really throw down.
These all issues are kind of all concurrent, right? So for me, like jumping onto X-Men, it was like this flurry of amazing Wolverine issues, and that fight issue is drawn by the great Alan Davis. I think that was the first time I'd seen his work, and it's Wolverine and Sabretooth tearing into each other for page after page. It's really gorgeous.
Yeah, and here, this is such a classic scene of them, going at it. But the thing about this scene, too, if you read the captions, it really defined the core of their relationship, which is, and again, why Wolverine always had, such a beef with Sabretooth, is because he saw himself in Sabretooth, and he saw what he could become if he did not retain pieces of his humanity.
Right, and there was also the fact that every time they fought, like Wolverine was kind of like the little brother, and that he usually lost those fights. Sabretooth was the one guy who kind of always got the best of him for years and years.
And then, as we move through Marvel history and X-Men history, I'm going to go back in time a little bit, but we've talked about the piecemeal nature. But I think one of the places where it really came together and solidified Wolverine as a character, and I think this is one of your favorite comics and favorite Wolverine stories as well, is when Chris Claremont and Frank Miller did Wolverine, the miniseries. Yeah, right?
This was like 82, I think, right? I think anybody who loves Wolverine, this is one of the benchmarks. This defines so much of what we think of the character now. This was kind of the first time there was a connection to Japan, right? Like first time we knew that was a part of his history, and kind of in the days sort of before we had the explosion of ninja movies and everything in the mid 80s. I think that was Frank Miller, being a huge Lone Wolf and Cub fan, was probably a part of that.
Yeah, as well as of the Yojimbo and Seven Samurai and films like that. Yep. Mm-hmm.
But now I think when a lot of times you think of Wolverine, you think of him in a room full of ninjas and fighting through them. This is what that comes from. This is the first time we got that.
Yeah, and you mentioned the code of honor is a big part of Wolverine's way of life and his viewpoint as a hero, or sometimes anti-hero. And this was, again, a miniseries where Chris and Frank together really kind of established that.
Right. I mean, Logan's clearly different than Spider-Man and Captain America and a lot of the big Marvel characters. He handles his business in very different ways, but he's a guy who lives by his own, deep sense of honor and what's right and what's wrong.
And speaking of another one of those Deadpool Punk's Wolverine covers, these were all fun. The artist had such a blast in doing them.
And you also get, that's one of the best uses of the snicked sound effect there in that last panel, which, I mean, I know for me as a comic writer, the first time I got to write that in a script was a huge deal.
Yeah, it was actually one thing we didn't look up, and maybe the Disney Archives people after the panel can go back and look it up. But when was the snick first used? I didn't even think about that one. Yeah.
Maybe that guy in the back knows.
What was that? I can't hear. I'm sorry. 98 or 99. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
And then, Jason, speaking of a couple more things, and again, going back to some of the things you said about Wolverine, the comics that really defined him for you before you were writing him, these were two issues in particular, two series in particular that you said were instrumental kind of in your Wolverine
just
upbringing.
two of my favorite Wolverine stories from over the years, and both these are kind of newer versions of that the Frank Miller miniseries. You know, the first one was an arc of the regular Wolverine series by Steve Skroce, the great writer artist who you may know from designing a lot of stuff on the Matrix movies. It's a great modern version of a Wolverine fighting ninjas story, which is hard to do one of those that feels new and fresh. But Steve did a great job with that one. And the Logan book deals with the Wolverine's connection to Japan and kind of his days, what he was up to back in World War II, and sort of a dark legacy from that period. And that's got a really incredible creative team, and it's by Brian K. Vaughan, who, you may know from Why the Last Man and Saga and lots of amazing things. And Eduardo Rizzo, who was artist on 100 Bullets. Like his version of Wolverine is really, really awesome. So yeah, two great books worth picking up, worth checking out.
Cool. Now, they also asked me when we were making this deck what some of my favorite issues were. And I actually picked this issue and this cover before I saw the Deadpool Wolverine movie. This was one of my favorite issues, a cover that everybody remembers. Obviously, Mark Silvestri. This issue came out when I was in my later high school days, and it always just stuck with me. And interesting thing, everybody saw the Deadpool and Wolverine movie, I'm assuming. I can take that. No spoilers for this crowd. I was talking to a couple of the people who worked on the film at the premiere, and I mentioned this. This was at the after party, and I mentioned this, like, I can't believe, because I didn't know this was happening. Like, I can't believe they put that scene in the movie, and they actually didn't do it with CG. They did that realistically. They took the skulls, they created them, they painted them all pink, they put Hugh up there on the cross, and they said that they filmed just that for that one scene. They actually recreated the set for this cover. Wow. And actually, what's funny, if people haven't read, we just relaunched X-Men with X-Men #1 by Jed MacKay and Ryan Stegman. I don't know if anyone has read it just yet. If you haven't, this won't spoil it, but Ryan actually homaged this in the new issue that came out just 2 weeks ago. Again, not knowing the scene was in the movie either. So this is such an iconic cover and an iconic scene for Wolverine's history that so many people know and love. Another one of my favorites, and I think maybe a favorite for some people in this room, was drawn by an artist you might have heard of called Jim Lee. Cheers to Jim, definitely. He had left such a mark on X-Men for so many people. Was X-Men 268, which was, again, dove into Wolverine's history. He's in his costume on the cover here, but they don't really appear this way in the issue. I think Natasha's even a baby in this issue, a young girl. But this, for so many people, became such an iconic issue. A one-shot, one of those beautiful Claremont done-in-ones with Jim Lee on art that people just remember. The action and the kineticism that Jim was able to capture in comic book format in this issue was so key for me.
And again, like Wolverine's long history, like all these different periods of his history we're just getting teases of here and there over the years.
And, we were talking about heavily homaged covers, and this is one and these are just a couple covers from the last few months that have come out where we looked at this cover just from different angles. Kari Andrews, Ron Lim, and I think there was a Ryan, that's a Philip Tan piece. It's that same classic shot of Black Widow, of Captain America, and of Wolverine on that rooftop that has been reinterpreted in so many different ways. And now, actually, we're going to move out. We're halfway through the panel, but we're getting to some fun stuff still. We're moving out of comics. We're going to move into some animation stuff. So who's a fan of some of the X-Men animated series here? All right, so another question for you. What series did Wolverine first appear in animated form?
I know.
Jason?
Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, correct. So everybody knows and loves the X-Men animated series, X-Men 94, or 97 now. But here was the first appearance of Wolverine and the X-Men in Amazing Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Now, there's a really funny story behind this. Does anyone know what accent he used? Australian, correct? Wow. You guys want to come up here and host the panel? So in this series, Wolverine was Canadian. He'd already been established as Canadian in the comics, but they decided to use an Australian voice actor for the voice of Logan in this. Does anyone know why? It's very simple. Mad Max and Crocodile Dundee were super popular at the time, and Australian accents were cool, so the producers thought it would be cool to give Logan an Australian accent. And no Australian has ever played Wolverine again. So
that doesn't explain him making kebabs, like shish kebabs with his claws, though. That's a
couldn't show
question.
claws on a
TV
show for kids. Yeah. And then, we've gotten Wolverine in so many ways, shapes, and forms as we've gone through, the years. And it's just his leap from comics to animation brought in a new generation of people who weren't reading comics, and it served as a gateway for so many people, not only as an introduction into the X-Men, but also as an introduction into Marvel Comics, which was a boon for us back then. And, here's just going through, this is where the Wolverine boom kind of started as well. There were so many different comics and so many different appearances by Wolverine, not only in other comics around the Marvel Universe, not only in X-Men comics, but he branched out. A series like here was The Incredible Hulk, again, with that kind of homage you again saw in the Deadpool and Wolverine movie. And again, another comic that's been homaged more times than most other Marvel comics in history. The great Todd McFarlane on that one.
Yeah, and then that second book is the first time we had a Wolverine ongoing series, right? Like before, you just had that Frank Miller Claremont miniseries, and from here it was no looking back. You've had Wolverine ongoing series ever since then.
Yep, and it was started to be in the Wolverine series that so many of the key moments, in Wolverine's life started to play out. You had him here kind of, they brought some, expanded on and brought some finality to the Wolverine Sabretooth relation. John Byrne took over at this point. This is such a classic pose of Wolverine. It was used in the 50th anniversary logo that you saw at the beginning of the panel. And then it was around this time that there was a comic called Marvel Comics Presents that debuted. And Marvel went to an artist who I know and love. I believe one of your favorite artists, too, sure, Jason. Yeah. Barry Windsor Smith. Yeah, there we go. And he took over Marvel Comics Presents at this point for one of the stories. And it was Barry who created Weapon X. And that's a theme that you've explored some of the Weapon X stuff in your books as well.
For sure, yeah. This was sort of the story of where did Wolverine come from before the X-Men days? How did that adamantium get on his bones? This was a part of telling that story.
And this is a storyline, the Weapon X program, that helmet that we've seen over and over again as we've explored Wolverine and his history in comics, in animation, and in film. So,
right
now, does anyone know? You probably don't, but I'll tell you. It's something that came in when they were editing this book. They asked Barry to write and draw it, and the editors figured Barry knew the Marvel editorial guidelines, what the comics code was all about back then. So Barry called up and said, I put the first batch of pages in the mail. You're going to be getting them. And turned in the issue. They opened up the FedEx when they got it. And Wolverine was fully naked throughout every page. Everything showing. So they had a little bit of a problem, but they were able to go back and work with Barry and if you go back and you look at the series, how they creatively edit it to make sure that nothing was too revealing was leaked in these issues.
Can we publish a red band version at this point, R-rated version?
And then as Wolverine continued to grow in popularity, we saw earlier he moved into a couple guest appearances. He moved into his own book. And then it became Wolverine Palooza, with him appearing in almost every comic in certain periods of time, crossing over with different people. And then introduction of a lot of different villains who some of you named earlier. Lady Deathstrike, Silver Samurai. Here we have some of the covers with their first appearances on them. And then here on the right, we have the first appearance of Wolverine versus Deadpool. That was an Adam Kubert cover, one of the, again, iconic covers. We just recreated it. Adam recreated it, actually, for the special edition for the Deadpool and Wolverine movie release.
It looks like Wolverine lost that fight.
Yes, looks like he did. Thank God for that healing factor that was introduced earlier in his history. But, a lot of great artists were on the book at this point, too, if you know, throughout the 90s. And then Wolverine started growing even further in his popularity as he moved into, not only the animated series, where he did not have fruit on his claws anymore as he popped out, but in the X-Men animated series. And again, we can just see some shots of some of the different parts of Wolverine's history from comics that were translated into the animated series, which is always great because, we always say that Marvel is a body and comics is the heart that pumps the blood into some of the other divisions. And it's always so wonderful to see, even back in the day, how the creators of the different TV shows and different, movies and such took inspiration from the comics. And now, as Marvel has grown, we take so much back into the comics division that some of the other divisions have created through the minds of some of the beautiful storytellers and filmmakers that we use. And Wolverine's next step after animation was one that I think a lot of people remember, was into video games. So everyone remember when this came out in the arcades back in the day? Yeah, this was an amazing game that all the Marvel vs. Capcom games were so iconic. And Wolverine was a character that so many people loved to play, and it was great to see him, in the brown suit here. Now he's back in the black and yellow, obviously in the film and in the comics, but here was when the popularity of the brown suit era, when they transformed him into 8 bits. That's the character they had on him. And then from video games, it was into toys. Wolverine's been made into put on paper, put into pixels, and then made into plastic. So that's another stage where a character has really hit the zeitgeist of pop culture, when you could go out to your local, well, there are no more Toys R Us's anymore. But you can go out and, especially now with Hasbro, the amazing toys they're putting out. Wolverine has, a 30-year history as an action figure, and some of us, as myself included, have these figures still in our basements on our walls.
Sure, I do too. Now it's work-related research.
Tax write-offs.
Exactly.
But continuing back into comics, then going through some of the evolution of Wolverine's history. Does anyone remember this issue? Yeah, so everyone said, oh, well, Wolverine's got an adamantium skeleton. That's metal. It's indestructible. But what happens if he fights Magneto? And sure enough, there was a period here where this was the first time where Wolverine's adamantium was extracted from his body quite painfully, as you can see there in the artwork. And this was where we were first introduced to the bone claws.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, you didn't know that there was bone underneath that adamantium until that point, right?
Correct.
It'd always just been metal claws, and you strip away the adamantium, and then you found out, oh, he had the claws before that.
Yep. So, and that was another big part of the history and the origin, but people had so many more questions about Wolverine when this came out. There was a resurgence, not only in his popularity and the way this character went off in different directions, but people wanted answers to the questions that this issue and the subsequent issues then opened up. So.
Right, yeah, because still, to this point, despite all those X-Men and Wolverine comics we've been talking about, you still didn't know Like, where was this guy from? What was his real backstory? Like, you'd only gotten, because he didn't know, right? You'd only gotten little pieces, little hints here and there.
Yeah, that's an important thing that we didn't bring up, though, is that remember, Wolverine did not have memories of his origin for the longest time.
Right.
Weapon X stripped them of them, as was established later, but we never knew what his true origin was. Big mystery. And then another storyline for those of you who are reading comics in the 90s or have followed up with or have recently seen the Deadpool and Wolverine movie, Age of Apocalypse. Any fans of Age of Apocalypse here? Yep. This was a redefining moment for Marvel as well, where Marvel just up and announced that they were canceling every X-Men title at the peak of popularity. And this is when you can do this. There was no internet. There was nothing people could, figure it out, and rumors would leak everything. Marvel just came out and announced they're canceling every X book and didn't announce what they were saying, and then relaunched the entire X-Men line under different titles with different characters in this dystopian future world, the Age of Apocalypse, where Wolverine was more feral and only had one arm. And Hugh Jackman so brilliantly portrayed him for, again, a brief scene in that Deadpool vs. Wolverine movie.
Yeah, I think they got the hair right, too, in the movie. That's a lot of hair.
So this was a storyline that when the Age of Apocalypse came out was a huge hit. It was about 30% of all comic sales in the world at that point, just the X-Men line, which is insane to think about. And then the popularity kept rolling. I think Age of Apocalypse lasted for how much? 6 months maybe when you count the Omegas and the Alphas? When you count the Omegas and the Alphas, exactly. The debut of so many artists that came on to Wolverine and the X-Men for the first time. Bob Harris was the editor back then of this line. It was so genius in a lot of his picks for writers and artists. And then Wolverine came back after Age of Apocalypse, and even before that, and has started some of this post started spreading into other books. And this is where the kind of Wolverine joke started developing. Like, how can Wolverine be everywhere at the same time? How is he in 10 different Marvel comics every month? How does he teleport? Does he have a jet? And so he was appearing in all these comics because he was helping boost sales because he was such a popular character. And now, Jason, this was something that intrigued you, and you actually took on that question of how can Wolverine be everywhere at once? And you did a brilliant story in only 2 pages, A Week in the Life of Wolverine.
I did do that, yeah. Yeah, it shows, it shows exactly that. Like, he's got a very, very busy schedule, and he's bouncing around from one team to another, one location to another, day to day, playing different roles, different aspects of his personality, hanging out with Spider-Man. Yeah, I forgot I did that. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And then it was a little bit later, after Feral Wolverine going back into his history, he got the adamantium back into him, or they tried to put the adamantium back into him. It didn't go too well. We had Feral Wolverine for a little bit, and that's where, going back to Wolverine's origin and his rivalry with Sabretooth, where he became the thing that he feared most. He'd lost the humanity in him.
Right. He'd always kind of battled this, like, berserker inside him, right? And sometimes that would get unleashed in little bits, and then he's always fighting to keep that at bay from overtaking him fully. And it was also around this time, actual physical time, not in comics, that Fox started developing the X-Men movies. It was actually, Hugh Jackman recently mentioned he'd been playing Wolverine for 24 years. And he'll be doing it for 90 years now, I guess. Or till he's 90, right, according to the film. Thank you, Disney. But Wolverine made the leap from comics into film so brilliantly. He was really embodied that character so well throughout the cinematic journey that he has been on. A journey that, going into it, as you all know, really came together. In the new movie. Thank you, everyone, for going out and see it. If everyone was so laughing so hard, go out and see it again. But in there, we saw him finally put on the yellow and blue. And how many people else got chills when he pulled down that mask for the first time? Whew. God, yep. They really know how to play that.
Now, speaking of Wolverine costumes, we mentioned earlier, Jason, that you had a favorite.
I do. I mean, I love the classic costume, and of course, I loved the brown costume from that era. But I think my favorite costume is neither one of those actually, and it's from the Grant Morrison, Frank Quitely run of New X-Men. It's just Wolverine shirtless with the dog tags and that black leather jacket. Like this to me is like the sexiest Wolverine ever, but like absolutely. And again, drawn by the absolutely incredible Frank Quitely.
Yeah, and the other thing about this with Frank, as you can see here, and you mentioned it earlier too, was the height. Some artists don't capture it, but Frank really, in comparison to all the other characters, and when he drew him, really nailed the actual size ratio.
Right. I mean, to me, it's like always been an important part of who Wolverine is. Right. He's not the tallest, biggest guy in the room. He's the shorter, scruffier looking guy that you can tell, even though he's a smaller dude, you can tell I don't want to fight that guy. Like that guy's going to mess me up.
Yep. And now it was around this time, it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, when Joe Quesada took over as editor-in-chief of Marvel. And one of the first questions he asked was, how come we never tell Wolverine's origin? How come it's always a mystery? And then people were just like, we can't. You can't tell Wolverine's origin. Now, the fact that he doesn't have an origin the mystery is a big part of his character. And then Joe said, well, maybe we should tell the origin. And Joe decided we were going to tell the origin. So it was in this origin where fans got a lot of questions finally about Wolverine's past. You see the bone claws there, which Joe actually illustrated these covers with Richard Izanov on colors that were so brilliantly done, where we revealed so much about Wolverine's past, and we saw him on the right there pop the claws for the first time.
And yeah, it's a story. If you haven't read it, it's worth going back and checking it out without it being spoiled, because it does subvert a lot of your expectations and surprise you along the way.
And it was also during Joe's era, and I remember this very clearly. We were in a creative retreat. Every now and then we have these creative summits where we get together with a lot of the writers a couple times a year. And Mark Miller, one of the great Marvel Comics writers, was in the room, and we were just spitballing about stuff. And he said, if the Avengers are the most popular characters, or about popular team, the Earth's mightiest heroes, how come you don't put popular characters like Wolverine and Spider-Man on the team of Earth's mightiest heroes? Like, well, he's an X-Man and he's Spider-Man. Well, why don't we put him on the team? And again, that's where Joe decided, why don't we put out a book where Wolverine is part of the Avengers? So not only is Wolverine a popular solo character, not only is he an X-Man, but for this era in the 90s, Wolverine became one of the Avengers.
As if he wasn't busy enough already, like he added another job on top of that. But yeah, the great run by Bendis on those books.
And now we mentioned Wolverine's healing factor. And a lot of times people always ask, just how strong is Logan's healing factor? So we're going to give you a few examples to show you just how strong Logan's healing factor is.
Spoilers, it's very strong.
So here, you can blow him up. You can burn all the skin off his body, burn his eyes out. Sorry, kids in the audience. But still, Logan will regenerate himself. Again, Umberto, I think these were drawn by you, correct? Yeah. So take him down to his bones. He'll still bring him back. What if we rip him in half? This is Damon Lindelof and Laniel Yu. If you rip him in, we could burn all the flesh off his body. He'll come back. What if we rip him in half? Will he be able to piece himself back together? Well, yes, he will crawl down that mountain with his claws and find the other half of his body and put himself together. Now, Jason, I think this last one is yours. Just how strong is Logan's healing factor?
Oh yeah, I did that. Yeah, I blew him. But that's one of my first Wolverine stories, one of my first Marvel comic stories, which I think he was doing this on purpose as a way to sneak in to, I'm sure, stab someone. So he needed to appear to be dead. But I also, one of the things we talked about in that story is it's not just, you know, he goes through this painful, traumatic experience, and then he heals and he's fine. Like, healing hurts too, right?
That's
like,
very important. Yep.
Even knitting himself back together really, really hurts. So basically the point of it is just, it's really, really hard and really, really miserable to be Wolverine, you know?
And then any popular character at Marvel tends to be the inspiration for other characters who can come from the minds of different writers and artists. And it was at one point in the early 2000s when Craig Kyle and Joe Quesada and Zeb Wells got together and said, how about we create X23? Laura Kinney. Any fans of X23 out there? Saw her in the film too. So yeah, they created the character with that's a beautiful Josh Middleton cover there on the left. The first appearance of as she was known, X23. She was not Laura Kinney yet, and then the miniseries after that redeveloped her a little bit more and fleshed out her origin. She had a mysterious origin, just like Logan had, and we were able to flesh that out in a lot shorter time than we had to wait to get Wolverine's full origin. And then actually, as part of the new From the Ashes line, Wolverine is going she'll be getting her own book, Laura Kinney Wolverine, which launches next month. So be on the lookout for that. But she is not the only member of Wolverine's family. We took the sound effect that we talked about earlier, Snicked, and we launched a digital series called The Family Snicked, which is of the four Claude relatives all together in one adventure. So you've got Dakin, Wolverine's son over there, obviously Logan in the middle, Laura Kinney in the bottom, and then Gabby, the clone of X23 there. And then, of course, you can't do a book about Gabby without Honey Badger, who is a popular character that many of you know. A little more underground, but fans of the old Wolverine and X22 series love the Honey Badger, so I had to put him in there. Also under Joe Q's watch, we had Old Man Logan, Wolverine, which I think you all know and love. It was a future story where, Wolverine had made the greatest mistake and destroyed the Marvel Universe. Parts of that, not fully the story, but, some of the emotions and some of the scenes and some of the writing for that were captured so beautifully in the Deadpool and Wolverine movie when Wolverine and Laura X23 had that really heartfelt scene of "You've always been that guy." It started here in the comic by Mark and Steve McNiven. Now, Jason, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'd be, remiss for bringing you all the way out here and putting you on stage and not letting you tell the story about some of the Wolverine comics that you've written over the years and how you've approached him, through your craft.
Well, I mean, I'm actually sitting here. I got into comics because of Wolverine. I won a Marvel Comics Talent Search contest, 24 years ago now, which was... I wrote a synopsis for a Wolverine story, dropped it on a pile of submissions at a convention, and I got picked and won, and that was my first published work. The editor at the time told me that mine kind of stood out because I did one of the only stories that wasn't Wolverine in a bar or Wolverine fighting ninjas. Mine was just him having a conversation with a woman that he encountered in the woods, and it was sort of like me doing Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man Is Hard to Find, but, with more stabbing. But it's sort of a dark exploration of kind of Wolverine's idea of faith and his own personal beliefs. And that was, again, that got my foot in the door, started my comic book career, and then I spent really like 7-8 years doing those same kind of stories with Wolverine. And I mean, to me, he's one of those characters you can do kind of anything with. Right? Like not every comic book character can you take and put them in every different kind of story. Wolverine, you can do an action story, a horror story. You can throw him into space. Like you can, I sent him to hell at one point.
Historical as well.
Exactly. Like he's all these different periods of his history. So there's so much you can do with him, And I even at one point, my comic book career began the same time my son was born. So as I was, learning to be a dad, I wanted Wolverine to be an authority figure, so I made him the headmaster of the school So we did Wolverine and X-Men, which was super fun. So I like that idea of the guy who initially was the surly loner, the guy with the claws of like, now he's the principal, right? So suddenly he's not cool anymore. Just like everybody who's a parent, at some point you get to that point where you think you're cool, your friends are cool, but to your kids you're not cool anymore. So I wanted Wolverine to have to deal with that. So yeah, like my life, my career was all intertwined with Wolverine for years and years. Yeah, see, now he's the guy getting signs put on his back during class, like poor Wolverine.
And then you also gave him an interesting love interest at this point, right? It wasn't just Jean Grey.
Sure. I mean, you can't do an X-Men book without kissing. The kissing is an important part of the X-Men history. So yeah, I loved putting him and Storm together for a bit. Storm's another one of my favorite characters.
And then, moving on into more of the modern history, the recent Wolverine run has kind of reestablished him. It was Ben Percy with these beautiful covers. On the left, you had Adam Kubert, another iconic image created in the last 5 years that really defined Wolverine and set him on a different path. And this is the first time, too, on the right, where it was the final battle ever, right? I'm sure, for Wolverine, and it was Wolverine needed an upgrade, so they actually gave him an adamantium suit, which was the first time that they've really put him in this regard. So not only was the adamantium in him, it was on him, and let's just say Hasbro really loved this design, so maybe in the coming months you'll be hearing something about that. But also now, one of the series that's going to be hitting in a few weeks that we're really excited about, along the lines of Wolverine Old Man Logan, is Wolverine Revenge. This is by Jonathan Hickman and Greg Capullo on his return to Marvel after 30 years. We're super excited about this. This is actually something that we're really happy with. It's a crazy story. It's Greg like you've never seen him draw before. They really get to cut loose because this book also has what we call a red band version. So just like the Deadpool and Wolverine movie is R-rated, there will be the PG Wolverine version of this book, and there will be Wolverine Revenge Red Band, which goes a lot farther, so families with children could buy 2 copies, one for the kids and one for the adults. Just some scenes of what's coming up there. Let's see now. Wolverine will also be relaunching next month by Saladin Ahmed and Martin Kokolo. This takes Wolverine and is from the ashes status quo and sends him up against one of the original foes he fought in X-Men 181, the Wendigo. But now here at D23, we wouldn't be fit to be D23 to talk about a couple Disney things. If folks hadn't known, we did do a crossover recently. Donald Duck. What if Donald Duck became Wolverine? This is available now on comic book shelves, and this was a collaboration, a Marvel team-up, if you will, with our friends at Disney, and we'll be doing a number of these books, but we knew that since it was 50th anniversary, we had to start with Wolverine. And much like the fruit on the claws in Pride of the X-Men, here you have marshmallows. But now, Jason, you recently wrote a Disney comic as well. You wrote Uncle Scrooge and the Infinity Dime.
I did, yeah. Uncle Scrooge, as written by the guy who wrote 7 years worth of Wolverine, just like you would expect. And there's actually a Wolverine-inspired moment in the book that features a berserker horde being unleashed, and it turns out to be a bunch of multiversal versions of Donald Duck. And if you know your Donald Duck, like you get him riled up, he turns into a Wolverine-style berserker. So it's very much an Uncle Scrooge story that's my love letter to Carl Barks and Don Rosa and the great rich history of Uncle Scrooge comics, but done in a Marvel style.
And for those of you who want to read this comic, not only are you going to get the 2 D23 comics with Umberto's covers here, if you come down to Jason's signing at 4:30, you will be receiving a free copy exclusive to D23 with this Esad Ribbit cover on it, and Jason will be happy to sign it for you down in Talent Central at 4:30. So there we go. Did you learn something new today? You like Wolverine more than ever? Well, thank you so much for coming. A shout out to Tim Dillon and Peter Charpentier and Unjung for putting this great deck together. We couldn't do it without them. Thank you for being Marvel fans. Don't forget to get your comics on the way out. And Jason and I will be coming out around the curtain over here if there's anyone who would like to say hello or wanted to get anything signed or chat with us ahead of time. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks.